Imagine watching a once rejected colt named Astro thunder down the home stretch, neck and neck with the favorites, refusing to yield even when it seems all hope is lost. In the most breathtaking moment of this story, Astro unleashes one final burst of speed that leaves the crowd gasping, proving that no obstacle is insurmountable when trust and determination collide. This electrifying climax is just one chapter in a journey filled with heartbreak, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a young trainer and his misunderstood horse. Curious to know how Astro rose from abandoned to adored? Stay with us through this entire story to witness every step, each twist, each triumph, each moment of doubt turned into courage. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on these heartwarming tales and the many more inspiring stories still to come. Julian Becker's auction house sat on the outskirts of Beaumont Falls, a sprawling countryside estate known for hosting lavish gatherings of the wealthy and ambitious. On that particular evening, every seat in the auction hall was filled. Eager faces peered over glossy programs detailing the lineage, performance history, and temperament of each horse to be presented. The hall buzzed with energy, an undercurrent of tension that always arose when prize thoroughbreds stepped into the ring. But as the auctioneer cleared his throat and prepared to announce the next lot, a hush fell upon the crowd. Into the ring stepped a tall, sleek bay colt, his coat catching the glow of the overhead chandeliers. The silence was palpable, every eye transfixed by this animal who radiated both elegance and an undercurrent of rebellion. From his seat in the second row, Damien Lockhart watched with cool detachment. One of the most influential figures in horse racing, he had a reputation for identifying champions long before they made headlines. Beside him sat his assistant, a wiry man flipping through pages in a leather-bound folder, ready to jot down any bid Lockhart might whisper. Lockhart observed the horse's tense stance, the flick of its ears, and the trace of white foam on its lips. In his mind, these were signs of vulnerability. Not enough weight, not enough muscle, he mused. He shifted in his seat and glanced at his assistant, then shook his head. Standing in the ring, the horse's handler tried to keep the colt calm, but the bay's muscles rippled in protest at every flick of the whip handle or jingle of the auctioneer's baton. This was no docile show horse. There was a restless energy coursing beneath the surface, coiling like a spring wound too tight. The handler caught sight of a young man standing near the back wall, Clayton Morris, barely into his 20s but already making a name for himself as a promising trainer with a gift for understanding difficult horses. Clayton leaned forward slightly, a look of fierce curiosity on his face as he watched the colt's every move. The auctioneer began his pitch, extolling the horse's royal bloodlines. Descended from Soren's ace on his sire's side, he declared, voice echoing, and the dam traces back to the champion mare Lunar Lady. Ladies and gentlemen, you won't find a lineage with such impeccable credentials anywhere else tonight. Yet the usual flurry of raised paddles and whispered bids never came. Lockhart's dismissive gesture had already done its damage. The man's disapproval sent a clear message to the other serious buyers in the room. This bay colt would not be worth their money. Seconds of excruciating silence passed, broken only by the rhythmic shift of the horse's hooves across the sawdust. The auctioneer's voice took on a hint of desperation as he searched the crowd. At last, a hesitant hand shot up from the shadows in the far corner. The bid was insulting, low enough to elicit a soft wave of murmurs from those seated nearby. A faint scoff escaped Lockhart's lips. He was done. As far as he was concerned, the colt was a lost cause. The young man in the back, however, thought otherwise. From the first moment he laid eyes on the bay colt, Clayton Morris saw something the others did not, a certain spark dancing in the horse's eyes. Where Lockhart saw trouble, Clayton sensed potential. Where the wealthy buyers perceived weakness, Clayton detected strength biding its time, waiting to be coaxed into the light. As the auctioneer tried in vain to drum up higher offers, Clayton found himself holding his breath, silently rooting for the horse to avoid an unremarkable fate. He knew all too well the destiny that often awaited rejects once the final gavel fell. Either they were snatched up by unscrupulous dealers or lingered in subpar stables where their spirits waned. In the farthest row, an older man named Jeremy Whitfield raised his bid card, His hair was streaked with silver, and deep lines etched his face, mapping years of working outside under the punishing sun. He didn't have the refined polish of a millionaire investor, nor did he want it. He owned a modest training facility outside Beaumont Falls, one that took in horses others had deemed hopeless. Tonight, that facility would soon gain one more resident. "All right, we have 3,500, the auctioneer managed, his voice tinged with exasperation at the meager offer. "Do I hear 4,000? Silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this colt hails from champion stock. Can we get 4? Another few seconds passed, more suffocating than the last. The hush suggested that no one was interested in contesting Jeremy's low bid. With an air of resignation, the auctioneer rapped the gavel. "Sold!" Just like that, the bay colt's future shifted in a single heartbeat. Clayton exhaled, relief mixing with a flutter of anticipation. The stands emptied quickly, people in tailored suits, in elegant dresses, moving on to discuss business or to celebrate recent acquisitions, leaving behind only a few stable hands gathering horses for transport. Damien Lockhart lingered a moment longer. From the corner of his eye, Clayton watched as the influential mogul rose, brushed imaginary dust from his trousers, and strode out with an air of casual certainty that he had chosen wisely, by ignoring the colt altogether. Jeremy paused at the railing, exchanging pleasantries with the auctioneer, then turned toward the horse. The animal stomped once, ears flicked back in annoyance or perhaps apprehension. That raw, electric energy had not left him, even though the crowd had. Drawing closer, Jeremy offered a gentle pat on the horse's neck. "Easy there, fella. I'm going to take care of you," he murmured. Clayton joined them, a quiet excitement pulsing in his chest. "Name's Astro, by the way," Jeremy said, nodding toward the slip of paper that accompanied the horse's papers. "Kind of a bold name, but I like it. Reminds me of a star that hasn't yet found its full shine." Clayton reached out, let the horse sniff his hand. Astro jerked his head upward in a gesture of warning. But there was a moment, just a flicker, when Clayton caught Astro's eye and sensed a flicker of curiosity behind that fiery facade. Maybe Astro was starting to wonder if there was more to life than rejection. Maybe underneath all the defiance, there was a spirit longing to run free, to be understood. Clayton felt a jolt of empathy that resonated with his own journey, a scrappy outsider trying to prove his worth in a world dominated by deep pockets and bigger names. Loading Astro into Jeremy Whitfield's battered horse trailer was an exercise in patience. The colt balked at the ramp, snorting and pawing as though this new confinement were some kind of personal affront. Raindrops began to patter on the metal roof of the auction hall, intensifying the tension. Most horses would need gentle coaxing. Astro demanded more than mere coaxing. He needed reassurance. Clayton took a soft step forward, guiding the lead rope in one hand while offering a soothing murmur. "It's okay, boy. We're not gonna hurt you." His calm tone pierced the colt's swirling anxiety for just long enough that Astro took a hesitant step inside, then another. And at last, the two men managed to secure him. Inside the cramped space, Astro stomped nervously, eyes rolling to gauge his surroundings. Jeremy shut the trailer door carefully, testing the latch twice to make sure it was secure. "I swear, half the folks around here would have thrown him into a rig without a second thought," he muttered. Then they'd be scratching their heads when he'd act up during training. Clayton nodded, his mind already racing with plans for the next few weeks. There was a fine line between teaching a horse discipline and crushing its spirit, and too many trainers chose the latter. That was never Clayton's style. He believed in earning a horse's trust through empathy, small triumphs, and mutual respect. It took longer, but the results spoke for themselves. A horse that performed from a place of partnership rather than fear. Their destination was Whitfield Farm, a humble property about an hour's drive from Beaumont Falls. The drive gave Clayton time to reflect on the evening. Despite the sting of seeing Astro shunned by the elite of the racing world, Clayton felt a growing conviction that the colt's story was far from over. The rainy night enveloped the trailer in a rhythmic lull, and the interior cab of Jeremy's truck smelled faintly of old leather and coffee. They exchanged thoughts on Astro's bloodline, quirks, and the training methods that might be most effective. Jeremy mentioned that he'd once taken in a similarly misunderstood mare, who'd gone on to win respectable mid-level races. Astro, however, seemed even more intense. a possibility that both excited and unnerved them. When they finally arrived at Whitfield Farm, the moon was high yet hidden behind thick clouds. Jeremy flicked on the overhead barn lights, revealing a row of stalls that were simple but clean. The gentle glow spread across bales of hay stacked neatly along the walls. The storm outside had grown louder, and thunder rumbled ominously. Clayton hopped out first to guide Astro, whose coat shimmered under the fluorescent light. The colt was jittery, nostrils flaring to take in the sense of this new place. His ears were perked, and his gaze seemed to dart from one corner of the barn to the next, as if searching for threats. Still speaking in soothing tones, Clayton led him into a spacious stall freshly laid with straw. "This is home for now, Astro," he said quietly. Jeremy watched from the door, arms folded, a faint smile on his weathered face. "I suspect that once he settles, this will be a new beginning for the both of you," he remarked. Clayton couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. A new beginning indeed, one in which a so-called reject would be given the space and understanding to grow into his potential. Dawn broke over Whitfield Farm with a damp hush, the sky still heavy with clouds from the overnight storm. Clayton emerged from the modest bunkhouse on the property, bleary-eyed but determined to start Astro's first day of training. The sweet scent of wet hay and freshly fallen rain filled the air. Horses in nearby pastures lifted their heads in greeting as he passed by. Astro's stall was his first stop. The bay colt stood near the corner, ears flicking alertly as soon as Clayton approached. His posture was tense, like a coiled wire, not quite certain if he should run or lash out. Maintaining a soft tone, Clayton entered the stall with a halter. "Morning, Astro," he murmured, carefully maneuvering so the colt could see him at all times. Astro let out a deep snort, eyes flashing. The memory of being carted off from the auction just hours earlier still lingered, and trust was not yet part of his vocabulary. Undeterred, Clayton spent a good chunk of time simply being present in the stall, halter in hand. He allowed Astro to circle around him, to sniff at his clothes, to test the boundaries of this new environment. Little by little, the horse's hostility simmered down, replaced by an uneasy curiosity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Astro allowed the halter to slip over his nose without too much protest. Clayton rewarded him with a gentle rub between the ears. Nothing dramatic, just a small reinforcement that acceptance would bring comfort rather than distress. They made their way to a large, round pen adjacent to the main barn. Soft earth cushioned Astro's hooves as he stepped inside, eyes wide with apprehension. It was open enough not to feel claustrophobic, but enclosed enough to keep him focused on Clayton's cues. Jeremy, coffee mug in hand, leaned against the fence, watching. He did not intervene. This was Clayton's show, and they both knew it. The first session was not about riding or intense drills, but establishing a baseline of communication. Clayton worked on basic groundwork, leading, stopping, turning, with minimal pressure. Astro responded with suspicion at first, reacting to every slight movement as though it might herald a sudden betrayal. Time wore on, and a subtle shift began to occur. Astro's frantic pacing slowed. The whites of his eyes, once so visible, began to recede. He was still uncertain, but there was less fear in each snort, less tension in each stride. The process was slow, methodical, and demanded patience. Clayton praised every small victory, a well-timed halt, a smooth pivot, a moment of stillness. He understood that building trust was not about dominance. It was about partnership, forging a bond where each participant listened to the other. Jeremy remained quietly impressed. In an industry that often valued quick fixes and rapid turnarounds, Clayton's approach was almost old-fashioned. But Jeremy had learned long ago that a patient hand and a gentle word could do wonders for a horse's confidence. As the morning wore on, the clouds overhead began to part, allowing the first rays of sunlight to spill onto the damp ground. The subtle glow illuminated the ring, catching the sleek lines of Astro's form, as if hinting at the promise that lay hidden beneath his uncertain demeanor. Over the next week, a routine settled in at Whitfield Farm. Each morning, Clayton rose before the sun to check on Astro. He cleaned the colt's stall, replenished water buckets, and made sure the feed was precisely measured to boost Astro's energy without overwhelming him. Despite having champion lineage, Astro was a bit underweight, an issue likely compounded by stress. Clayton introduced a specialized diet rich in quality grains and supplements to help the horse regain muscle mass. By mid-morning, they were in the round pen. Initially, Astro resisted any request for forward movement, balking at the slightest suggestion of a trot. But Clayton discovered something fascinating. Once Astro actually began trotting, he relaxed. The action itself seemed to soothe him, shifting his mindset from apprehension to focus. This revelation shaped how Clayton structured their sessions. He'd start slowly, with minimal cues, coaxing Astro into a slow walk, then a brisk trot, until the horse reached that gentle rhythmic flow. With each passing day, Astro's hesitance decreased, replaced by a budding confidence. Outside the ring, the quiet hum of the farm provided a calming backdrop. Stable hands mucked out stalls, tractors rumbled in distant fields, and the other horses grazed contentedly in wide pastures. Sometimes young colts in adjacent paddocks would whinny challenges to Astro, as if testing the mettle of the newcomer. Early on, Astro answered with nervous whickering, a high-pitched sound that betrayed his anxiety. But as he grew more comfortable, his responses deepened into steadier, more assured neighs. It was a small change, but one that signaled a shift in his self-perception. He was starting to own his space. When dusk approached, Clayton would often bring Astro into the barn for grooming, using soft brushes to work through the horse's mane and coat. Grooming is bonding, his old mentor had once told him. Horses are social by nature, and touch can bridge the gap between fear and trust. During these sessions, Astro would sometimes pin his ears back at the sound of approaching footsteps, especially if they belonged to someone unfamiliar. But Clayton noticed the colt was quicker to relax when he realized it was only Jeremy or one of the other stable hands. The aggression was fading, replaced by cautious acceptance. Jeremy, for his part, kept a keen eye on these developments. He'd occasionally comment, "He's looking less like a live wire and more like a horse with a purpose." But mostly he let Clayton do the work unimpeded. The older man had weathered enough false starts in his career to know that forging a champion took more than blind optimism. It required resilience, skill, and a deep-rooted connection between rider and mount. He was pleased to see Clayton and Astro forming exactly that. Each evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon, Clayton would stand at the fence of Astro's pasture. Watching the colt canter among the shadows, a sense of pride welled up inside him. If Astro could take these steps forward, day by day, how much further could they go together? The question both thrilled and haunted him. After all, in the world of horse racing, potential meant nothing if it wasn't realized when the stakes were highest. One blustery afternoon, while the clouds raced overhead in shifting patterns of gray and white, Clayton decided the time had come to see if Astro could handle a saddle. The colt had proven more receptive to halters and leading ropes, so Clayton reasoned that this next step was logical, though not without risk. Astro's tension still hovered close to the surface, and Clayton knew any abrupt movement could trigger a bout of panic. Nonetheless, progress demanded boldness. He led Astro into the enclosed ring. Jeremy stood by the fence with a few stable hands, ready to step in if things got out of hand. Clayton began the process with slow deliberation, first laying a soft pad over Astro's back, giving the colt time to sniff it. Astro snorted once, stamping a foreleg, but did not flee. Encouraged, Clayton eased the saddle atop the pad, careful to let the stirrups dangle gently without clanging. As he circled around to cinch the girth, Astro's ears flattened in obvious discomfort. Clayton paused, stepping away momentarily to offer a reassuring pat and murmur. Only after Astro's posture relaxed again did he proceed. When the girth was finally secured, Astro bristled at the unfamiliar pressure. Muscles along his flank quivered, and he tossed his head. But rather than pulling away, Clayton guided the colt to walk in a circle, letting him feel the saddle shift with each stride. Initially, Astro balked, kicking out once in protest. Clayton kept calm, maintaining a loose but present hold on the line. The key was to ensure Astro understood that nothing was attacking him. The saddle was simply there. After several minutes, Astro's agitation subsided, though his eyes still flicked with lingering skepticism. Clayton gradually introduced a light bit, as gently as he could, but Astro resisted, shaking his head vigorously. Clayton decided not to push too hard. They ended the session on a positive note, removing the bit but leaving the saddle on for a few more leisurely circles until Astro walked without immediate complaint. Then Clayton removed the saddle and gave Astro a thorough grooming, concluding the day with a sense of cautious optimism. Slowly but surely, they were inching toward the possibility of a proper ride. That evening, the sky unveiled a stunning sunset, a tapestry of purple and gold that stretched across the horizon. Whiffs of hay and the distant scent of blooming lavender in the nearby fields floated on the breeze. Clayton wandered into the tack room to tidy up, reflecting on Astro's progress. He was well aware that simply riding the colt was not the end goal. Racing was. The entire point of training a horse with such impressive bloodlines was to harness that inherent speed and grace on the track. Could Astro truly become competitive? The question loomed. Overcoming fear and learning to trust Clayton was a monumental step, but racing would require a whole different level of confidence, endurance, and cunning in the face of fierce competition. Jeremy stopped by, leaning against the doorframe. "You see that look in his eyes today?" he asked, a slow grin lighting his face. "Scared, sure, but also curious. Almost like he's wondering if maybe this could be something worth his time." Clayton returned a wry smile. "I noticed. It's like each day he realizes he isn't stuck with the future everyone else assumed for him. Maybe, just maybe, he's starting to realize he can choose something else." Several days later, after relentless sessions with the saddle and numerous tests of boundaries, Clayton decided to mount Astro for the very first time. It was a pivotal moment that would define their relationship going forward. The morning air was crisp with a low fog hovering over the pastures, lending an ethereal quiet to Whitfield Farm. In the round pen, the ground was soft but not muddy, ideal conditions to ensure the horse's comfort and safety. Clayton ran through his usual routine, starting with thorough grooming. By now, Astro had come to anticipate these sessions, shifting less and even lowering his head slightly to receive the brushstrokes. The saddle came next, followed by the bit. While Astro still threw the occasional reluctant toss of his head, he no longer resisted with the same vigor. Jeremy, ever watchful, stood by, hands deep in his jacket pockets. "No shame in backing off if you see him get too antsy," he advised quietly. Clayton nodded. Caution and respect for Astro's limits were paramount. Steeling himself, Clayton placed a foot in the stirrup, maintaining gentle tension on the reins. Astro snorted, ears flicking back. Clayton paused, inhaled, and then exhaled slowly. "We're doing this together, boy," he whispered, voice calm and low. Then he swung his other leg over, settling into the saddle with care. Time seemed to slow. Astro's muscles tensed beneath him, and for a split second, it felt as though the colt might bolt or buck. But Clayton remained poised, projecting reassurance through the subtle shift of his weight and the gentle pressure on the reins. To everyone's relief, Astro did not explode. Instead, he stood, breathing heavily, uncertain of what was expected. Clayton patted the colt's neck. "Good, good," he murmured, letting Astro absorb the new sensation of bearing a rider's weight. Slowly, Clayton nudged him forward with soft heel pressure. Astro took a hesitant step, then another, each hoof landing as though testing the ground for hidden perils. When they completed a full circle without incident, Jeremy let out a long breath he'd been holding. Clayton continued at a walk, guiding Astro around the perimeter of the pen. Occasionally, the colt would flinch or threaten to sidestep sharply, but each time, Clayton kept the corrections gentle yet confident. Their communication felt tenuous, like two people speaking the same language for the first time but unsure of each other's dialect. Still, progress was undeniable. With every quiet command from Clayton, Astro became a little more trusting, a little more willing to follow his lead. After several minutes, Clayton brought Astro to a halt and carefully dismounted. The applause from a few onlookers, mostly stable hands who had gathered, sensing something monumental, broke the stillness. Clayton's heart hammered in his chest, but it was exhilaration he felt, not fear. Astro exhaled, a long, deep breath that signaled both relief and burgeoning acceptance. Jeremy approached, placing a hand on Clayton's shoulder. "Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs are the smallest steps," he said. "Remember that." Clayton nodded, filled with gratitude and excitement. The first ride, successful as it was, opened 1,000 doors. And somewhere beyond the distant fences and rolling hills, a world of racing glory beckoned, a stage where Astro could prove that a horse once dismissed as weak could rise to spectacular heights. Clayton had barely dismounted from that first ride when the vision for Astro's future began crystallizing in his mind. At this juncture, trust was still in its infancy, precarious as a sapling in a windstorm. Yet, the spark he'd witnessed, the glint of willingness in the Colt's eyes, hinted that their bond could become something extraordinary. Over the following weeks, Clayton devoted himself to deepening that bond. While the early groundwork emphasized gentleness and caution, he now introduced structured exercises designed to build Astro's stamina, agility, and mental resilience. Each morning, the pair would start with a calm walk around the ring, transitioning into a trot, and then carefully easing into a canter. With every rhythmic hoofbeat, Clayton guided Astro to understand that speed could be channeled rather than feared. The memory of Astro's skittishness still lingered, so Clayton was diligent about forging positive associations. He used consistent verbal cues, light rein pressure, and generous praise whenever Astro cooperated. The repeated patterns soothed the colt, helping him anticipate what came next instead of panicking over unknown demands. Outside of training, Astro's routine also expanded. Jeremy often encouraged Clayton to hand-walk the colt around the farm, exposing him to innocuous but potentially startling sights. A tractor rattling over gravel, feed barrels rolling, the clang of metal gates. At first, Astro would tense at every abrupt noise, his muscles bunching as he prepared to flee. But after multiple walks, punctuated by steady reassurance, Astro showed increasing composure. He'd lift his head at a sudden sound, flick an ear, and then relax once he recognized there was no threat. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. On more than one occasion, Astro had an unexpected outburst. During a quiet afternoon ride, a gust of wind knocked a ladder over near the barn. The sharp crash sent Astro lunging sideways, nearly unseating Clayton. Heart pounding, Clayton had to make a snap decision. Yank the reins tight to force control, or loosen them slightly and speak calmly, reminding Astro that he wasn't in danger. Clayton opted for the gentler approach. He eased back on the rein pressure, using his voice to coax the colt away from the source of his fright. Though it took a few tense moments, Astro eventually settled. This philosophy of guidance rather than domination was becoming the core of Clayton's method. After each ride, Clayton would untack Astro and bathe him, using the cool water to rinse away sweat and help the horse associate exercise with soothing relief afterward. Astro seemed to relish these sessions, lowering his head to let the water run over his neck. Sometimes he'd even nuzzle Clayton's shoulder, a tentative but meaningful gesture of acceptance. Jeremy watched with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "He's coming along faster than I expected," the older man remarked one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the rolling hills. "Next thing you know, you'll be itching to test him on a proper track." Clayton simply smiled. Indeed, the idea had already begun percolating in his mind. The pen and pastures at Whitfield Farm were a solid start, but the thrill of seeing Astro stretch his legs on an actual racetrack was growing harder to ignore. The decision to introduce Astro to a real racetrack was not taken lightly. Clayton recognized that while the controlled environment of Whitfield Farm had allowed them to build trust, the track presented a new set of challenges. Crowds, noise, the proximity of other galloping horses, any of these could trigger Astro's latent anxiety. Yet, if they were ever to realize the full potential of this colt's bloodline, they had to face those unknowns sooner rather than later. One crisp morning, Jeremy loaded Astro into the trailer while Clayton stowed away gear for the day. Their destination was the Beaumont County Practice Track, a modest facility open to smaller operations and independent trainers. The drive took close to 40 minutes, winding along narrow roads flanked by old oaks and farmland. Astro shifted restlessly during transit, the thud of hooves against the trailer floor echoing each time the truck slowed or turned. Clayton glanced out the side mirror, gauging the horse's agitation. For a moment, he recalled the day they first brought Astro home, how uncertain the colt had been. Although Astro was still uneasy with travel, his fear didn't feel as consuming as before. Another subtle sign of progress. When they arrived, the track was bathed in morning sunlight, and a few other trainers trotted their horses around the oval. Various stable hands bustled with chores, hosing down concrete walkways or moving bales of straw. Astro's eyes widened at the unfamiliar bustle. He stomped once, ears swiveling nervously, but allowed Clayton to guide him off the trailer. Jeremy looked on, nodding in approval. "He's definitely sharper, but not panicked," he remarked, keeping his tone low so as not to spook Astro further. They started slow, leading Astro around the perimeter of the track on foot, letting him breathe in the pungent blend of dirt, hay, and horse sweat. An occasional overhead announcement crackled through loudspeakers, making Astro's ears flick in alarm. Clayton was mindful to never let tension creep into his own posture. Horses fed off human energy, and the last thing he wanted was to spook Astro by seeming anxious himself. After a half hour of acclimation, Clayton eased into the saddle. The plan was simple: walk, trot, and, if Astro showed confidence, a gentle canter along the track's inside rail. The first few steps felt tight. Astro's entire body coiled like a drawn bowstring. But as they proceeded, Clayton employed the same calm, incremental cues that had worked at Whitfield Farm. Astro, to Clayton's relief, responded with growing ease. By the time they completed a quarter lap, the colt's stride had lengthened, and his ears began rotating forward in mild curiosity rather than pinned back in worry. It was only when another horse cantered past that Astro's tension spiked. The sudden rush of hooves, combined with the quick flash of a rider's silhouette in his peripheral vision, caused him to shy to the side. Clayton tightened his legs, riding the movement without yanking the reins. Gradually, Astro steadied. His breathing was ragged, but no meltdown ensued. "Good boy," Clayton whispered, the small phrase carrying a world of praise. Jeremy watched from near the railing, relief on his lined face. Astro was holding it together, and though it was just a practice run, both men could see the faint outlines of something far grander forming on the horizon. News of Astro's progress slowly trickled through local racing circles. While the major stables and wealthier patrons paid little heed, folks who frequented Beaumont County practice track began chatting about the bay colt that arrived with skittish eyes and left looking like a horse on the verge of discovery. One morning, while Clayton was running Astro through a controlled gallop, an acquaintance approached Jeremy at the fence line. "You training that nervous one?" the man asked, nodding toward the track. Jeremy recognized him as a small-scale breeder who occasionally raced his own stock. "Saw him at the auction, I did. No one would give him a second glance." Jeremy offered a tight smile. "We're giving him that second glance, more like a second chance." The breeder whistled, watching Astro's fluid strides. "He's got the look of a runner now. Shame the folks with deeper pockets wrote him off." The man's words echoed what Jeremy and Clayton had quietly come to believe: that Astro possessed raw talent. Every canter at the practice track, every minor improvement, reinforced the notion that beneath Astro's guarded exterior lay champion-level ability. Of course, there was still a gulf between potential and performance. Consistency was key, and that meant learning to manage Astro's episodes of fear without losing momentum. On an overcast afternoon, Clayton decided to test Astro with a faster pace. They started with a light jog, then shifted into a brisk trot. Once Astro found his rhythm, Clayton nudged him into a full gallop on the backstretch. The wind whipped around them, and for a few seconds, Astro ran freely, his hooves pounding the dirt in a near-musical cadence. But as soon as another horse came up a few lengths behind, Astro threw his head high, ears pinned back in alarm. Clayton felt the shift, the colt's stride turning choppy as worry started to overtake him. Instead of pulling on the reins or forcing him to keep pace, Clayton eased up, guiding Astro toward the inner rail where they could slow safely. He patted Astro's neck, whispering encouragement while the other horse thundered past. Initially, the colt's breathing was ragged, but after a few paces he calmed. It was a small setback, a reminder that Astro's confidence in tight racing conditions was still shaky, but it also demonstrated just how far he'd come. A few weeks prior, such an event might have triggered a wild bolt or a refusal to move at all. Clayton took it as another teaching moment. "All right, buddy," he murmured under his breath, stroking the horse's mane. "We'll get there, one lap at a time." Back at the trailer, Jeremy helped unsaddle Astro. Rubbing the colt down, he said, "We'll keep bringing him here. We'll keep letting him see that a little noise and competition doesn't have to be a threat." Clayton nodded, mind swirling with potential training drills. The stress of the environment was a hurdle, but so was Astro's lingering sense of unworthiness, as though the colt still half expected someone to discard him at any moment. Clayton sensed that once Astro truly embraced his own worth, there would be no stopping him. Meanwhile, at the upscale Continental racetrack across the county, Damian Lockhart was orchestrating grand preparations for the next major event, a series of sponsored races that drew the region's most promising thoroughbreds. Though Lockhart had not spared a single thought for the bay colt he had dismissed at auction, rumors of a horse named Astro, rehomed and apparently thriving, began to circulate. Naturally, he didn't connect the dots. In his world, a horse without immediate, obvious promise wasn't worth the mental space. Yet fate had a way of weaving paths together. Lockhart had secured multiple entries in the upcoming races, and his stable's prize stallion, Imperial Bolt, was favored to sweep the mid-distance event. One afternoon, an associate dropped by with idle chatter. "Heard about a dark horse in training at Beaumont County," the man said casually, swirling a glass of expensive brandy. "Supposedly overcame some nasty fears. Nothing official on the circuit yet, but folks say it's got speed." Lockhart sneered, uninterested. "Speed without breeding means nothing," he replied. "And if it does have breeding, well, it's likely an underachiever if it's been toiling at that practice track." At Whitfield Farm, Clayton and Jeremy worked tirelessly, unaware that Lockhart had begun to hear vague mentions of Astro's name. Their focus was directed solely on incremental improvements. On days the track was too crowded or conditions too chaotic, they ran endurance drills on the farm's largest paddock. Clayton would ask Astro for a smooth canter around the perimeter, gradually increasing the time and pace. During cool-down periods, he'd walk Astro around the barn's perimeter, pausing near gates and equipment to desensitize him further. Progress was evident in Astro's demeanor. Gone was the wild-eyed readiness to flee at the first unfamiliar sight. In its place was a quiet vigilance. He was still attentive to his surroundings, but that attention now channeled into curiosity. The once tense line of his neck and shoulders loosened. During training, his steps became lighter, his transitions between gaits more harmonious. Even better, he began to show sparks of competitive spirit. On days when another horse happened to be in the practice arena, Astro sometimes tried to keep pace, ears forward as though intrigued by the concept of outrunning a peer. Of course, not every session ended on a high note. Occasionally, a gust of wind rattling an aluminum gate or a sudden commotion in the stable caused him to retreat into old habits. But each time he recovered more quickly. Clayton believed these stumbles were part of a larger arc, each slip a chance to solidify Astro's confidence anew. Jeremy likened it to forging steel. You didn't get the blade's true strength without heating and hammering it multiple times. Then came an opportunity Clayton had been half hoping for and half dreading. A smaller local race meet was scheduled at Beaumont County's track the following month. The card included a low-stakes maiden race, a chance for unproven horses to test themselves. It was far from glamorous, no major prize money, no substantial accolades. But it was official. "Think we should enter him?" Jeremy asked one evening, studying the flyer pinned to the barn wall. Clayton hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The time had come to see if Astro could handle the pressure when it truly mattered. Clayton spent the lead-up to that local maiden race refining Astro's routine. In addition to their regular training, he increased exposure to potential race day triggers. They practiced loading and unloading from the trailer multiple times, simulating the hustle and bustle Astro would encounter at the track. Jeremy even recruited friends to stand by with clipboards and cameras, mimicking the presence of a small crowd. Astro's ears would flick nervously at the camera flashes, but each repetition lessened his startled response. The night before the event, Clayton barely slept. Anxiety gnawed at him, not because he feared failure, but because the stakes felt so personal. This was the same horse deemed worthless by the elite crowd, a crowd that included Damian Lockhart's circle, whether the man himself remembered Astro or not. If Astro's performance floundered, it might justify their dismissals. But if he ran well, even if he didn't win, it could be the spark that lit his racing future. Dawn broke with a faint mist clinging to the countryside. Loading Astro went smoothly, to Clayton's immense relief. The colt seemed more serene than ever before on a travel morning, as if part of him sensed the importance of the day. Arriving at Beaumont County's modest racetrack, they found the grounds already bustling. Small-time owners and trainers led their horses around, some calm, others jittery. Food vendors set up tents selling hot coffee and pastries to the sparse but growing number of spectators. The aroma of fried dough mingled with the ever-present scent of fresh hay. Clayton and Jeremy guided Astro to an assigned stall, careful to keep his stress levels down. When a loudspeaker crackled an announcement for riders to gather in the paddock, Astro's head shot up, but he did not panic. After a few soothing words from Clayton, the colt returned his attention to a water bucket. The improvement was tangible, a testament to the months of patient training. When the time for the maiden race drew near, Clayton checked Astro's gear with methodical precision. Saddle, girth, bridle, all in place. He stroked the horse's flank. "We're just here to do our best, boy," he murmured. Jeremy gave a final nod as Clayton mounted, the older man's expression a mix of hope and paternal concern. They trotted toward the starting gate, the metallic contraption that had unnerved many a green horse. Astro's ears twitched at its clang and the activity of gate workers guiding equine entrance into narrow stalls. One by one, horses were loaded, hooves clattering against metal. Astro stood tense but did not try to back away. Clayton murmured a reassuring phrase, and to his relief, Astro stepped into the gate. The handler slid the door shut behind them, leaving the colt and rider in that claustrophobic compartment. Above the din, the announcer rattled off the names of each entry. The wait felt agonizingly long. Suddenly, a buzzer sounded, and the gates sprang open. In a rush of pounding hooves and adrenaline, the maiden race was on. Astro leapt forward, almost too eagerly. Clayton steadied his position, guiding the colt onto a decent trajectory. The initial surge from a competitor on their left caused Astro to pin his ears in fleeting alarm, but the colt didn't veer off course. Instead, he leaned into his stride, chasing the thundering forms ahead as if he had finally awakened to the thrill of competition. The first furlong blurred by in a whirl of flying dirt and the roar of the crowd, a modest roar, but a roar nonetheless. Clayton, heart pounding, felt Astro's powerful muscles bunch and release with every stride. It was the first time he had asked the colt for true racing speed, and Astro responded with vigor that took Clayton's breath away. Despite the lingering edge of nervous energy, Astro's legs churned the track with impressive momentum. However, racing was an entirely different realm than practice. Horses jostled for position, riders shouted commands, and the sound of hooves pounding in close formation could rattle even seasoned contenders. Around the first bend, Astro balked momentarily as another horse drew near his flank, the proximity reminding him of past uncertainties. He swung wide, losing a little ground. Clayton kept his hands firm yet gentle, using soothing words to guide Astro back into a balanced stride. Each adjustment was a negotiation between giving the colt freedom to run and offering the reassurance that he wouldn't be overwhelmed. Mid-race, Astro settled into a flowing rhythm. He wasn't leading, two horses had pulled slightly ahead, but the bay colt had enough stamina to stay within striking distance. Clayton sensed a growing confidence in Astro's movement, as though the horse realized he belonged here, among peers, rather than slinking in the shadows of doubt. Jeremy watched from the rail, heart in his throat, marveling at how different Astro looked from the terrified colt they'd unloaded at the farm months ago. The final turn approached, and Clayton had decided to test the waters. He eased the reins, encouraging Astro to shift gears. The surge of speed was electrifying. Astro's stride lengthened, his ears flicking forward as he caught sight of the two front runners. Yet, in that critical moment, the noise from the stands seemed to rise in pitch, and the flicker of camera flashes popped from the corner of Astro's vision. Startled, he momentarily lost focus, stumbling just enough to break the momentum. By the time Clayton righted him, the gap between Astro and the leaders had grown. They thundered down the home stretch, finishing third in a field of 7, a respectable debut, especially for a colt once deemed untrainable. As they crossed the line, Clayton allowed himself a jubilant exhale. It wasn't a victory in the record books, but in every other sense, it felt like one. Astro pranced in the cool-down, head held higher than usual. It was as if the horse knew he had proven something, not just to the onlookers, but to himself. Back in the makeshift winner's circle area, a few spectators approached to congratulate Clayton on Astro's performance. While the official winners received more attention, the rumor of the skittish colt who grabbed third made the rounds. Jeremy met them with a grin. "He ran well," was all he said, though his eyes sparkled with pride. Clayton gave Astro a post-race pat, mindful to keep the horse moving until his breathing steadied. In that quiet, unguarded moment, the overwhelming feeling was relief mixed with excitement for the future. In the days that followed, word of Astro's maiden race result reached further than Clayton expected. Third place might not typically command attention, but the narrative of a once-rejected horse holding his own stirred interest among smaller stables and a handful of local enthusiasts. A few even dropped by Whitfield Farm to take a look at the bay colt, whose unexpected debut hinted at untapped potential. Jeremy and Clayton welcomed these visitors politely, though neither had any intention of selling. Astro was more than a project. He had become the heart and soul of their operation. Meanwhile, Damien Lockhart's empire hummed with preparations for Continental Racetrack's upcoming meet. Locked in his own bubble of high-stakes racing, he still paid no mind to the gossip swirling about a dark bay named Astro. His star entrant, Imperial Bolt, was dominating local qualifiers, ensuring Lockhart's confidence soared. To him, the rest of the racing world, and especially smaller-scale trainers, were background noise, irrelevant unless they threatened his standing. Clayton's ambitions, however, did not involve grand gestures or toppling titans overnight. He focused on incremental improvements, determined to refine Astro's racecraft. They practiced braking from a mock gate, simulating the chaos of an actual start. They also arranged private mini-scrimmages with friendly trainers who brought their own green horses. The more Astro saw others surge ahead or flank him on the curves, the calmer he became. His fight-or-flight instincts evolved into something more akin to competitive zest. One afternoon, a local trainer named Rosa Delgado paid a visit with her mare, Cinnamon Rose, who also raced the maiden circuit. Delgado had heard about Astro's promising speed and asked if they could breeze the two horses together. Clayton agreed, recognizing the value in pairing Astro with a horse near his skill level. The session was illuminating. Astro started tentatively, but as soon as Cinnamon Rose picked up speed, he responded in kind, powering forward without a hint of panic. In fact, the pair pushed each other, each stride fueling the next. By the time they slowed, Delgado was grinning ear to ear. "He's got heart, this one," she said, giving Astro a pat. "Don't be surprised if he starts finding the winner's circle soon." At day's end, after the visitors left, Jeremy approached Clayton with a thoughtful expression. "So, what's next? We keep running him at the local meets, hoping for a big break, or do we take a shot at something more high profile?" Clayton took a moment, letting the breeze rustle the leaves overhead. "We're building him up," he finally replied. "The bigger races might be tempting, but I'd rather get his confidence unshakable before we place him against the region's elite. He's not just competing against them, he's competing against his past." The answer satisfied Jeremy, who recognized that each race should be a stepping stone, not a leap of faith into territory where Astro's nerves could unravel. Little did they know events were already set in motion that would thrust Astro onto a larger stage, one where Damien Lockhart and his champion stallion would be front and center, forcing a showdown that neither party had anticipated. But for now, Whitfield Farm buzzed with the modest glow of accomplishment and the promise of greater triumphs yet to come. 2 months after Astro's promising third-place finish, the racing calendar brought news that Continental Racetrack would be hosting a special invitational event for emerging three-year-olds. Touted as the Rising Stars Showcase, it promised a moderate purse and, more importantly, a platform for lesser-known horses to test themselves against stronger competition. Clayton and Jeremy weighed the pros and cons. On one hand, the race was expected to draw bigger crowds and a handful of established trainers who often use such meets to scout talent. On the other hand, the higher pressure and more intense environment could rattle Astro, especially given that this was exactly the sort of venue Damien Lockhart frequented with his prize stallions. Yet, the invitation felt like fate knocking. Astro had already run a few local meets with growing consistency. He'd managed a fourth-place finish and, just 2 weeks prior, a thrilling second that had come down to a nose at the wire. Clearly, the colt was on an upward trajectory. Each race chipped away at his lingering anxiety, forging in him a newfound determination and poise. Jeremy believed that, while Astro might still have the occasional spook, the horse's competitiveness had outgrown his fear. They decided to accept the invitation. signing Astro's name on the dotted line with a surge of quiet optimism. In the weeks leading up to the event, Clayton meticulously honed Astro's preparation. Early morning gallops at Beaumont County's track became more intense, with an emphasis on teaching Astro to switch leads smoothly and accelerate on the final stretch. Clayton also teamed up with Rosa Delgado again, breezing Astro alongside Cinnamon Rose in mock duels that tested both horses' resolve. Astro responded with a fierce kind of zeal, as if determined to never let anyone pass him without a fight. Delgado often marveled at how the once skittish bay now exuded a magnetic confidence that challenged her own mare to keep up. On the administrative side, Jeremy took a hands-on approach, making sure Astro's papers were in order, coordinating transport logistics, and speaking with the event's stewards. Though the entry was modest by higher-tier standards, a good performance here could open doors. Clayton sensed Jeremy's guarded excitement. The older man had seen enough heartbreak in this business to know that talent alone didn't guarantee success, but it sure helped. The buzz around Astro grew as well. Word of a colt with champion lineage who'd beaten the odds was the sort of underdog story the local racing community loved. The moniker Second Chance Star began circulating among the smaller stables. And while Clayton found it a bit dramatic, he couldn't deny the effect it had on spectators who gravitated toward a tale of redemption. Sometimes teenage fans would appear at Whitfield Farms fences, hoping for a glimpse of the sleek bay galloping in the distance. Astro, for his part, seemed oblivious to the attention, far more preoccupied with his structured training and daily routines. All the while, Damien Lockhart's name loomed like a distant thundercloud. Though Clayton and Jeremy had seen no official sign that Lockhart would attend the Rising Stars showcase, it was widely known that his top stallion, Imperial Bolt, had dominated mid-distance competitions all season. Imperial Bolt wasn't expected to appear in a junior-level event, but the Lockhart stable had a knack for unveiling new prospects at unexpected times. With each passing day, a knot of anticipation settled in Clayton's stomach. Whether Lockhart showed up or not, the upcoming race at Continental could become Astro's defining moment, the point at which he either seized the promise of his bloodline or confirmed the naysayers' belief that he was too fragile for top-tier competition. Race day dawned under a clear sky streaked with pastel hues of pink and gold. Jeremy maneuvered the trailer into Continental Racetrack's sprawling grounds well before the crowds arrived, securing a parking spot near the far end of the stabling area. The facility dwarfed Beaumont County's track, featuring grandstands that could seat thousands and a paddock ring lined with polished brass rails. Clayton stepped out of the truck, surveying the hustle of security guards, concession workers, and stable hands rushing back and forth like a small city shaking off its early morning slumber. Astro let out a low nicker when Clayton lowered the ramp. Despite the unfamiliar setting, the colt's stance remained composed. Ears alert but not pinned back, hooves shifting only slightly in the straw. "Good boy," Clayton murmured, offering a gentle pat before leading him into the assigned stall. Continental's stabling area was state-of-the-art, rows of immaculate stalls, wide aisles, and large overhead lights designed to minimize shadows. While a few of the other horses fidgeted or called out, Astro focused on his surroundings with calm vigilance, as if assessing this new environment rather than fearing it. During the veterinary check, Astro stood quietly, allowing the officials to listen to his heartbeat and examine his legs with minimal fuss. Another sign of progress, Clayton thought, recalling how the colt used to flinch at the mere sight of a stranger approaching. Jeremy paced nearby, chatting with a steward about the race's format, an 8-horse field running a mile-long test suited for younger thoroughbreds. "The pace might be slower at the start," the steward mentioned, "but watch out for a late break in the final furlong. These juvenile races can be unpredictable." As the morning wore on, more trainers arrived, each leading their own aspiring star into the stable block. A few recognized Astro and stopped to comment on his improved condition. Their remarks ranged from polite curiosity to outright admiration of the colt's sleek coat and muscular form. Clayton accepted the compliments graciously, though he felt a subtle edge creeping into his nerves. Had they done enough to prepare? Would Astro hold his composure amid the frenzy of a larger event? The tension ratcheted higher around midday when Clayton overheard a snippet of conversation from two passing grooms. Lockhart's bringing a new filly, one said. Some Hotspur dynasty bloodline. She's entered in the Rising Stars to get a feel for the track. The revelation prickled down Clayton's spine. So Lockhart would be here after all, even if they weren't racing head-to-head, since the filly was in a different heat. The mere presence of the powerful trainer who had once dismissed Astro as worthless filled Clayton with a contradictory mix of resentment and resolve. He forced himself to focus on the basics. Check Astro's feed, walk the colt around to keep him limber, maintain a light warm-up schedule before heading to the paddock. Step by step, minute by minute, Clayton kept his routine on track, refusing to let Lockhart's looming figure derail his concentration. By early afternoon, the stands began filling with spectators, their voices merging into a dull roar that floated through the stable yard. In less than an hour, Astro would step onto the dirt of Continental's grand track, answering the question that had haunted him from the auction block. Was he truly meant for greatness, or would he unravel under the weight of expectation? Clayton led Astro into the paddock ring with Jeremy at his side, conscious of every detail: the glint of sunlight on the colt's coat, the rhythmic swish of his tail, the stride that signaled an athlete ready for the test ahead. The crowd lining the rails was larger than anything Astro had ever encountered. Lively chatter, camera flashes, and the occasional cheer rippled through the air. Yet, to Clayton's relief, Astro held his head high without spooking. His ears flicked back and forth, gathering input, but he didn't shy away or dance sideways as he might have months ago. "It's like he's wearing armor made of confidence," Jeremy whispered, unable to hide a grin. Clayton nodded, though he felt the flutter of tension in his own stomach. The other horses filed into the paddock, some prancing with nervous energy, others stomping as their grooms tried to steady them. Astro kept his composure, a stark contrast to his early days at Whitfield Farm, when any sudden sound could set him off. A short distance away, Clayton noticed a flash of a familiar face. Damian Lockhart stood near the rail, conversing with a well-dressed woman while sipping from a silver thermos. Perhaps Lockhart sensed eyes upon him, for he glanced up, meeting Clayton's gaze. The older man's lips twitched in faint recognition. Or was it dismissal? In that moment, memories of the auction night flooded Clayton's mind. Lockhart's casual rejection, his confident pronouncement that Astro would never be worth anyone's time. Steeling in himself, Clayton turned away. He had more pressing matters than indulging in old slights. The call for riders to mount echoed through the speakers. Clayton did one last equipment check: girth, bridle, stirrups, then gathered the reins. He placed a reassuring hand on Astro's neck. "Let's do this, boy," he murmured. Astro puffed a breath, ears angling forward as if to say, "I'm ready." With practiced ease, Clayton swung into the saddle. The world outside the ring faded, replaced by the warm presence of the horse beneath him and the surging excitement in his chest. They stepped onto the track amid an explosion of noise. Spectators pressed against the barriers, leaning over to snap photos or shout encouragement. Astro flicked an ear backward, acknowledging the racket, but he maintained a steady walk toward the starting gate. One by one, the field of 8 slotted into the metal compartments. The gate crew knew their jobs, guiding each horse swiftly and smoothly. Astro paused, let out a brief snort, then settled in, only shuffling a hind hoof once before standing still. A testament to the countless hours Clayton had spent helping him overcome his claustrophobic fears. The buzzer clanged. Gates swung wide, unleashing the thunder of hooves. Astro sprang forward, slipping into a swift, controlled stride. Clayton felt the surge of adrenaline, the coiled power in the colt's muscles. He carefully measured his own breathing, determined not to tense up and transmit that anxiety through the reins. 2 horses took the early lead, pressing the pace. Astro settled in just off the rail, holding third but not quite challenging for the front. Clayton was content with this position for now. They had a full mile to strategize. On the backstretch, the thunder of hooves and the roar of the crowd merged into one unrelenting din. Astro's stride felt fluid beneath Clayton, each hoofbeat an affirmation that the horse was ready, truly ready, to compete at this level. The question was whether the final stretch would bring out the doubt that lurked in the corners of Astro's mind, or if he would harness the fierce drive Clayton had witnessed in training. As they rounded the second turn, the moment of truth drew ever closer, each fraction of a second carrying the weight of Astro's history, and the potential for a future no one but Clayton and Jeremy had believed possible. By the halfway mark, the pace quickened. Two front-runners dueling for position threatened to break away, their jockeys urging them on with fervent hand rides. Clayton felt Astro's eagerness surge, a subtle tension coursing through the reins, as if the colt were asking for permission to unleash his full speed. "Not yet," Clayton whispered, leaning in, ensuring Astro didn't burn out too soon. They had practiced this tactic during training, waiting for the perfect moment when the leaders began to tire, then seizing the advantage in the final furlong. Behind them, other horses jostled for position, and the shifting shadows of their forms stretched across the dirt. A chestnut gelding edged closer, trying to slip by on the inside. Astro responded with a flick of his ear and an almost imperceptible increase in pace, thwarting the attempt. The colt's competitive spirit flared, but it remained controlled. No wild bolting, no panicked veering that might have haunted his past self. Clayton's heart soared at the progress. Astro wanted to win, and he was channeling that desire intelligently rather than succumbing to fear. At the three-quarter pole, the lead horses started to show strain, their strides losing a bit of snap. Clayton seized the opportunity. He loosened the reins ever so slightly, pressing his heels lightly against Astro's sides. "Go," he urged. Astro responded like a coiled spring unleashed, driving forward with a burst of acceleration that ate up the gap between them and the front-runners. The crowd's noise intensified as the bay colt drew even with the pace-setters. Three horses now neck and neck in a riveting clash. Sweat glistened on Astro's flank, muscles rippling beneath his sleek coat. Clayton heard the other jockeys shout commands, felt the thunderous vibration of hooves. In the stands, he glimpsed a sea of faces. Among them, was that Lockhart leaning forward? He couldn't dwell on it. The final turn was upon them, and the trio barreled around the curve in a cacophony of hoofbeats and laboring breath. Clayton sensed Astro gathering himself for the stretch run. He murmured encouragement, giving the colt freedom to extend his stride. They straightened into the home stretch, and for a split second, time seemed to slow. The lead horse on the rail faltered, dropping back. Astro now contended with only one rival, a gray filly surging hard on the outside. Neck and neck they stormed, dust kicking up behind them. The filly's jockey furiously drove her on, urging her to dig deeper. Clayton felt Astro's heart thudding in tandem with his own. This was it, the crucible where a champion was forged or a pretender was exposed. The filly gained half a length. Clayton's pulse hammered as doubts flickered. Would Astro yield, overwhelmed by the challenge? Then, in a moment that would become etched in Clayton's memory, Astro pinned his ears back, lowered his head, and responded with a final electrifying push. The gap vanished. They drew level, stride for stride, until Astro nudged his nose in front. Spectators rose from their seats. With one last fierce surge, Astro crossed the wire a breath ahead of the gray filly, capturing victory by the slimmest of margins. For a moment, neither Clayton nor Astro seemed to breathe. Then the realization crashed in. They had won. It wasn't just a race, it was redemption incarnate. Astro pranced in the runout, ears pricked, as though reveling in the cheers that cascaded from the stands. Clayton's eyes stung with unshed tears. This was what they had worked for through every doubt, every sleepless night, and every ounce of faith that one stubborn trainer and one misunderstood horse could muster. He patted Astro's neck, voice trembling. "You did it, boy. You really did it." Minutes later, Clayton dismounted in the winner's circle, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Jeremy rushed over, eyes shining with pride. They clasped hands, a brief moment of celebration before the official photos were taken. Astro stood tall, only slightly lathered, as if determined to show the onlookers that he was no fluke. Spectators pressed in along the fences, snapping pictures and murmuring about the remarkable performance. A local reporter jotted down notes, already forming a story about the underdog colt who bested the field. Just as Clayton finished slipping the bridle from Astro's head for the inspection, a stern voice broke through the crowd. "I'd like a word." Damian Lockhart stepped forward, impeccably dressed, his expression guarded. The swirl of onlookers parted for him. Clayton felt Jeremy bristle beside him, recalling the man's dismissal of Astro. Still, Clayton composed himself. Yes? Lockhart paused, his gaze sliding over Astro's sweat-dampened coat and the wreath of flowers draped over the colt's powerful neck. For a heartbeat, it seemed Lockhart might deliver some withering remark, but instead he nodded curtly. Impressive. This is the same horse from that auction, isn't it? His tone held an edge of grudging respect. Clayton sensed the weight of past grievances hovering between them. He decided not to let bitterness taint the moment. Yes, the same one you wrote off. Turns out he had a bit more heart than you thought. An uncomfortable silence stretched. Then Lockhart drew in a slow breath. I won't deny it, I misjudged him. My stable's been following his progress for a few weeks now, ever since word got out he was placing in local meets. He glanced at Astro with something akin to genuine admiration. He's proven his potential. If you're looking to take him to the next level, my facilities could offer training and management that smaller operations can't match. His eyes flicked to Clayton. Name your price. A mix of emotions swirled in Clayton's chest. Vindication, pride, and an undercurrent of disbelief that the man who once considered Astro worthless was now prepared to buy him at any cost. Jeremy tensed, ready to rebuff Lockhart outright. But Clayton steadied himself, looking from Astro to Lockhart. He's not for sale, Clayton said, gentle yet unwavering. Astro is family, and we're building our own stable. We'll take him to the next level ourselves. A flash of frustration crossed Lockhart's face, but he quickly masked it. Listen, I'm talking about a serious offer. You'd have every resource at your disposal. This horse deserves the best chance to become a champion. He already has one, Jeremy interjected, stepping forward. The tension in his voice was palpable. We appreciate your interest, but there isn't enough money in the world to buy what Astro represents to us. Lockhart's jaw tightened. For a moment, it appeared he might press further. Instead, he exhaled, conceding ground with a tight nod. Fine, but if you change your mind, you know where to find me. A horse like that, he won't stay under the radar for long. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode away through the thinning crowd. Clayton, Jeremy, and Astro were left in the afterglow of victory, a moment that felt almost surreal. As reporters and photographers descended upon them, Clayton gently stroked Astro's cheek, marveling at how far they had come. The horse who once trembled at every new sight and sound now stood triumphant in the most demanding environment he had ever faced. When asked to describe the journey, Clayton's voice quivered with pride. He was never broken, he said simply, thinking of that night at the auction. He just needed someone to believe in him. The cameras clicked, flashbulbs lit up the winner's circle. Later, as they loaded Astro for the trip back to Whitfield Farm, Clayton caught Jeremy's eye, and both men shared a smile that encapsulated every challenge, every disappointment, every triumph. They knew the road ahead would only grow more intense. Bigger races, stiffer competition, and the constant pull of wealthy buyers seeking a piece of their champion. But Astro's spirit and their unshakable bond wasn't up for auction. This was merely the first triumphant note in a symphony they planned to write together, defying every doubt and forging a legend in the world of racing, one stride at a time. Looking back on Astro's incredible journey, being dismissed as worthless, overcoming his fears, and ultimately standing triumphant in the winner's circle, I can't help but feel inspired by the power of belief and perseverance. Every setback he faced became a stepping stone, guiding him toward a future no one could have imagined when he was first overlooked at the auction. Clayton's devotion and Jeremy's unshakable faith formed the bedrock of Astro's transformation, reminding us all that true potential often emerges when someone dares to nurture it. This story celebrates more than a single victory. It honors the courage to keep going, to keep hoping, and to keep caring, even when the odds seem impossible. Thank you for following Astro's path to redemption. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moments moved you the most? Share your ideas and experiences in the comments so we can keep this discussion alive.